Uh, so, this is Unit 1 review. Hopefully, you guys know that. Um, can you guys hear me? I just saw someone ask if you guys are here. Yes, I am talking. Okay, we're gonna give some people, few stragglers, a couple of minutes before we start. Audio and screen share are working. Perfect. That's great. Once again, we're gonna be waiting for some people in case they're joining a little bit later. Yeah. Um. Hopefully, some of you guys are quote unquote enjoying a push. I know this is not an easy class at all. Uh, last in Canadian. Wonderful. Very wonderful. You guys are very fortunate to not. I don't know if that's a fortune per se, but just doing AMSCO. AMSCO is a good text. Yeah, you can go through class with AMSCO. I haven't used it personally, so yeah. College U.S. history. I am not sure whether or not the curricula will align directly. I'd suggest checking the CED out and checking your syllabus for that. I'm not familiar with Unfinished Nation. Heimler is a good resource as well. In case you do not have time to attend the lectures or watch recordings, Heimler does give very good review videos. American Pageant, I haven't heard a whole lot about it. I don't have it on me, but I do know it's a common textbook. I've heard some varying things about American Pageant. Anyways, we'll give it a, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. It's gonna go past 5, but it'll be fine. Hopefully, we should be able to cover the content in 2 hours, less than 2 hours. My main goal is to get through this. Probably it's gonna take at least 1 hour, but ideally be an hour and a half. So we have like half an hour of you guys asking questions about this unit. Also, want to make sure people don't miss anything. How am I doing? I am tired. Last night was a bit of a hectic night for me. Not only for preparing this lecture, but a bunch of the lectures that are coming later soon. It's got to be well prepared. Where will the recording be? Yes, I am recording as of right now. Yes, this lecture will be recorded in case people want to attend, but they can't. I think it's fair for me to record. Yeah, the recording will be posted on YouTube. Yeah, as of right now, it's being recorded. And the link will be in the lecture schedule document. These slides will also, I believe, I think I'll make these slides also available on that sheet, that schedule document. Okay, well, it looks like we're oscillating between 33 and 34. Hopefully, everyone else who's joining later will be fine. So, today is going to be Unit 1 review for AP US History, or A Push. This unit is not really content heavy. It's not very heavy on the exam like the other units, but nevertheless, it's worth reviewing some of the stuff that is covered in this unit. So, before we start with the content, just want to give you guys all a reminder that yes, I have prepared this review session as a 5-5 member. So you can read this blurb. It's a volunteer, organization, and our aim is to help out a lot of AP students to get to improve their chances of getting a better score on the AP exams. And feel free to check this document out here if you do want to join 5-5. Again, the slides will be posted and you can access that later. Of course, we have a disclaimer. AP is a trademark associated with College Board, and we are not affiliated with or endorsed by College Board. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. I cannot guarantee that anyone will get a 5, but I will try my best to make sure you guys leave this lecture with a solid basis. Also, some expectations. Please be respectful to each other in chat. The please only unmute part was made before a lot of stuff, so I don't know if that's relevant. But please do let me know if there are some questions that I haven't answered in the chat for a while. Normally, I want to give you guys that opportunity as much as I can, and do try to be engaged with the lecture. There will be some activities in here as well. And one reminder is that this lecture is being recorded in its entirety. So, yeah. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to go over 1.2 through 1.6, and you'll see activities we're doing. A little note, we're skipping 1.1 and 1.7 because there's not much point in lecturing on those when they're about historical thinking skills, and it's just not worth covering in a content review session. All right. So let's jump in deep to 1.2. So 1.2 is about Native American societies in the pre-Columbian era. And when I say pre-Columbian, I mean the time period that before Columbus kind of started messing things up in the Americas. And when I say messing things up, I mean causing a lot of historical significant change, right? I mean, kicking off the age we call the Age of Discovery. So all this is not exactly going to be tested on the AP exam, but it is worth knowing a bit of prehistory. So hopefully you guys are aware that most of modern humans did not live in the set continent. So the American continent was not exactly, populated by modern humans. The first modern humans come out of Ethiopia, Africa. And what they do is they migrate to other parts of the world, Europe, Asia, and America. But the big question is, how did they get to America? Well, land bridges. There is a working theory that some of them knew how to sail, and that's a matter of Polynesia, but that's outside the scope of the exam. So yeah. And the reason why I want to emphasize the Bering Strait or the Bering Bridge is that the old world, that being Asia, Europe, and Africa, and the new world, that being the Americas, kind of developed in very different ways. They were not the same, and you will see this be illustrated throughout this unit. One thing you do need to know before we go into Native American societies is American geography is not homogeneous. So me being a California native, I could describe the weather, what the weather is like, what kind of temperature, what kind of animals I would see if I went out hiking in the wilderness, and I would bet quite a sizable amount that someone who lives, say, in the Midwest or in the East Coast, in New England or so, would describe a different experience, right? So the main geographical regions that we're going to be looking at for today is mainly the West, that being the West Coast, meaning California and Cascadia. If you don't know what Cascadia is, it's just Washington and Oregon. We'll be looking at the Southwest, so present-day Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Texas, parts of Colorado. And we'll be looking at the Southeast, which is the South in general. The Northeast is going to consist of New England, and this middle section here, kind of the point where the South and the North become a little bit hazy. And we'll be also looking at the Great Plains and the Great Basin. I will group them in one because they have similar geography. Um, so yeah. Now, in regards to these regions, Native Americans lived quite different lives. So what College Board wants you to know is what were their societies like? How did they get food, for instance, right? In civilizations, you need food sources. Humans need food to live. Hopefully that's a fact you know. But also with food sources, there comes some kind of need to organize a group of people. And we call those societies or civilizations. So let's start off with the West. Not because I'm biased about California, but in the West, that being California, Oregon, and Washington, most Native Americans, you should know, mainly did fishing. Fishing was a big thing in the West because it's literally the West Coast. The Pacific Ocean is right there, but also there's a lot of salmon in that, at least in Cascadia, Pacific salmon and trout. Another thing that you should know is that Native Americans also did hunting and gathering, at least in the West. So, big three things that Native Americans in the West did: hunting, gathering, and fishing. Some examples of things that might be in their diet: obviously salmon, I mentioned that, but also acorn. And usually what they would do with acorn is process it into flour and do whatever they want. They would also forage pine nuts and also hunt deer. The kinds of societies that the Western Native Americans had is kind of a melange. It can vary. It could be mobile or it could be permanent. Now, permanent societies will most likely happen when we have more stable food sources. Things where we have a stable source of salmon, for instance. So maybe like if you are a Native American living closer to the ocean, you'll be more likely living in a more of a permanent settlement. While the mobile natives would do something I would like to call follow the food, right? Because food like deer, elk, etc., move around. They don't just stay still. They graze. They move to wherever there is food for them, right? And so hunters and gatherers would just follow animals as well. Examples of Native Americans that you could look into yourself might include the Chinook, the Hoopa, and the Yakut. I included a picture of Hoopa, and yes, spearfishing salmon, because I really want to reiterate that point. Fishing is important in the West. Okay, let's move on to the Southwest. Southwest being Arizona, New Mexico, that region. In the Southwest, the big point that you should know is that Native Americans there were big on agriculture. Were they agricultural experts? Not exactly, but for the most part, the majority of their diet comes from crops. Crops like what? Corn, beans, and squash. Corn, beans, and squash. And we're going to call these the three sisters from now on because they are quite important in Native American diet, as you will see in future regions. Another thing you should know is that in the Southwest, they kind of needed irrigation systems. So I included a Hohokam Canal here, like an example of a complex irrigation system that Native Americans use to bring water to their crops, because crops need water. As you might imagine, with stable food sources, such as just growing crops in the same place, crops don't go anywhere. At least I hope they don't. If it's a good day. Because of those stable food sources, we're going to see larger settlements that stay where they are. They're going to be permanent. You'll see intricate villages. And a good thing that would illustrate this is Chaco Canyon, which is one of the sites in the Southwest. And you'll see that it is a very huge complex. You see houses, a bunch of houses, apartments even, apartment complexes, and religious kivas and all that. Examples of Southwest natives that, lived in large settlements would include the Pueblo people, the Hohokam, the Mogollon, and the Anasazi. Sometimes the Anasazi is called the ancestral Pueblos. Terms may vary. Okay, move on quickly to the Northeast. The Northeast, Native Americans did a combination of agriculture and hunting and gathering. So as for agriculture, you can probably expect they mainly planted the Three Sisters. Again, corn, beans, and squash. In addition to that, they not harvested. They gathered berries, they foraged berries, and also hunted deer. Similar kind of situation with Native Americans in the West. However, at this point, what Native Americans did in the Northeast is that makes them a little different from the West is that they had complex networks. They engaged in trade. In fact, some of the Three Sisters were considered cash crops. They traded those Three Sisters with other Native American societies. Even we see a lot of diplomacy between these Native Americans, and you might think that I am referring to just Native Americans doing trade deals and all that. No, they had democratic alliances. And the one example, or the only famous example, that you should know are the Iroquois Confederacy, which consisted of 5 nations at the initial founding, but there was a 6th nation that I don't remember the name of exactly. But the big point about the Iroquois that you should know that will be relevant in a future unit is that a lot of historians consider it to be the first democracy. Why? Each nation had their autonomy, but they also engaged in a democratic process in making decisions. Once again, we'll dig deep into that when we discuss the founding of America as the nation we know. Let's move on to Southeast Native Americans. Southeast being the South. Wow, who would have thought? So, by the way, I misspelled Iroquois. There should be an S at the end there in the caption. Iroquois woman harvesting the Three Sisters there. As for the Southeast, again, they had a similar kind of food source as the natives in the Northeast. They did agriculture, hunting, and fishing. The thing is, the way they did agriculture was quite in-depth. There were lots of methods that they used. They used slash and burn tactics, and they used intercropping. So what slash and burn is that, they would kind of set the land on fire. But the benefit of doing that is to actually give nutrients for the farmland. Of course, if you do this enough times, you kind of are beating a dead horse. Not beating a dead horse, but you're kind of abusing the land in that way. And, of course, that kind of leads to bad stuff involving farmland and fertility. Intercropping is basically just swapping out crops as you go. So maybe I might be planting corn for one season, and once that's done, I might plant some other crops so that I have a consistent surplus of food. As for the fishing side of things, the usual, they fished salmon. But another thing that's interesting is that they also trapped shellfish, so like clams and mussels. As a result of these stable food sources, again, you'll see permanent settlements. But what distinguishes the Southeast a little bit from the Northeast is that they had huge urban centers, mound societies, large populations, a lot of trading. These trade networks were quite vast. And in fact, it leads to the development of one site we call Cahokia. Cahokia was a very huge Native American settlement in modern-day Mississippi. And unfortunately, Cahokia doesn't exist anymore. We only see mounds. We're not quite sure what happened to Cahokia, but since Cahokia thrived off of trade, again, the shells, and from crops, and from the fact that they're nearby rivers, so they have natural networks, natural routes for trade. We had huge urban centers, a bit similar to Tenochtitlan as well in modern-day Mexico. And then finally, we're going to move on to plains. I know this is a lot of stuff I'm dumping on you guys. You don't need to memorize every single detail. But for Plains Indians, they mainly were hunters and gatherers. They lived very mobile lifestyles. They mainly hunted buffalo, bison, and other kinds of animals that could survive in the plains. Now, at one point, they did practice agriculture. At one point, they did plant the Three Sisters, but in the 14th century, we have evidence of a drought. So that kind of forced Native Americans to adopt a more mobile lifestyle. Again, they did follow the food as well. Some of you guys might have the misconception, I added this in my notes as well, that these Native Americans used horses. Horses are non-native to the Americas, but we will see the introduction of them, and I will touch on that much later on in the unit. Before I move on to 1.3, are there any questions you guys have about what we've covered so far? Any clarifications about 1.2? I've seen someone ask, do you need to know all the tribes? No, you don't need to know every tribe. Okay, someone's asking which tribes are where. I forgot to mention which tribes in the slides were. That's disappointing. So the Hohokam are from the southwest. The Hohokam are related to the Pueblo people. And I think I will mention the Pueblo people at some point in Unit 2. The Hupa people and the Chinook are from the west, so California and the Cascadia. The Sioux are from the plains or the Great Basin, and or Great Basin. The Choctaw are from the southeast. Cahokia is a settlement. We don't know if we don't really have a particular name. We just call them Mississippians. Mississippians are in the southeast. Choctaw are in the southeast, part of the 5 civilized tribes. And the Iroquois is a confederacy of Native Americans living in the northeast. Could you also go back to what methods that the southeast natives used in their agricultural practices? Yes, the Sioux are in the Great Plains. So what southeast natives, they kind of do, they practice something a little bit similar to the southeast. Oh, wait, what methods? I'm sorry, I misread the question. I thought you said northeast for a second. The southeast, they will do slash and burn technique and intercropping. Which society in the southeast were hunters and gatherers? There's no predominant society in the southeast that are exactly mainly hunters and gatherers. They do that as a part of diversifying their diet, so to speak. For the most part, the southeast is mainly agricultural. Do you need to know the techniques? No, not exactly, but it would be helpful to understand the context. The society was matriarchal. So, Native Americans, we'll cover this in 1.6, the last 1.6, yeah, the last topic. But for the most part, women had a more significant role in Native American societies than European women did. So, some societies were matriarchal, others weren't exactly matriarchal. Which one are the fishing ones? Pretty much the West. The West, you should know, is the big one for fishing, but fishing has happened in the Southeast as well. Sometimes in the Northeast, but not very frequently. Is it worth studying this unit? Not necessarily. I'm just doing this for the sake of review purposes. Okay. On that note, do we need to memorize all this information? Nope, not necessarily. You just need to know developments. Corresponding to each region. Yep, pineapple juice is right. Okay. Before we run out of time, let's move on to 1.3, European exploration in the Americas. So, in this topic, we need to explain why Europeans even bothered exploring the Americas. What's the point? They're in Europe. They're having such a great time. They're not. But why? Why is that? And before we want to answer that question, we need a little bit of context, and this is actually technically 1.1 in some ways, establishing context. But hey, I think it's some information worth noting. So, 3 things we need to know about Europe: disease, society, aka feudalism, and religion. So, as for disease, prior to the discovery era, as I will refer to this as now on, we had quite a bit of an important epidemic, that being the Black Death, the plague. The importance of the Black Death is that, one, it reduced population significantly, but two, well, we have, what's the best way of describing this? One, yeah, the population decreases significantly, but two, this kind of, in some ways, decimate economies. And when we talk about economies in this time, pre-discovery period, we're talking more about food sources. And so this kind of does some damage to the feudal system. And hopefully you guys know from world history what the feudal system is, or what feudalism is. But if you don't know, it's basically this system where we have some people on the top, we'll call them a king or something like that. And they have knights or lords, people who govern under them. And what they do is that the governor has a relationship with the king. What is that? Well, they pay him stuff. That's pretty much it. And what the lords do for the king as well is that they own serfs. And what those serfs do is that they harvest for the lords. The lords will give those serfs protection. They have a military in their own right. And those serfs will give the lords food. And part of that food will also go to the king. That's a oversimplified version of what feudalism is. But you should cover in AP. We should have covered in AP World. And then the last part, religion, is probably the most important in this time period. Why? Religion is a very powerful, motivating force in Europe. Many Europeans viewed the Catholic Church as this almighty entity. If a pope didn't like you, pope being the head of the Catholic Church, he could excommunicate you. And if you were excommunicated in Europe, that meant a lot. That meant that nobody should like you. You are a sinner and you're cringe. And excommunication was pretty much a big deal. If you got excommunicated, what you might do as a European ruler or a lord, you would react, please forgive me, I'll pay you anything, I'll pay you my entire treasure. And that's what they did do. Yes, the Catholic Church was paid to lift up those excommunications. But that's not the most important part. The most important part is actually the Crusades, religious zeal. The Crusades, as you probably already know as in popular history, was a series of campaigns between the Europeans, Christian Europeans, and the Muslims in the Middle East. Now, do you need to know the entire history about the Crusades? No, you need to know that they happened and that they reinforced religious intolerance. And this will segue us to the actual main meat. Religion was one of the key motivators in European exploration. Why? After coming out of the not Reconquista, it is another campaign in reclaiming Spain from the Muslims, but also Crusades were a campaign to reclaim Jerusalem and other holy sites from the Muslims. After those kind of holy wars, we get Europeans who are so hyped. I'm like, man, this Christian thing is awesome. I want to spread it to other people, whether or not they like it. Regardless, these Europeans will want to travel outside of Europe to spread Christianity, whether by benevolence or by dominance. It doesn't really matter. Another thing you should know about motivation is wealth or trade. One of the things is, okay, why do Europeans want to go to the Americas? Well, when they did eventually discover America again, they found that there would be some neat stuff such as minerals. Americas were rich in minerals, gold and silver. But that's not actually the real point at this point. That's for colonization. For exploration, the real intent was to circumnavigate the Muslims. At this point, we had the Silk Road, albeit it's kind of, at this point, it's a little irrelevant in some ways. But what Europeans did is they engaged in trade with the Muslims, such as the maritime republics, Venice, Genoa. And what they didn't like was the fact that Muslim rulers taxed them. See, they didn't want to have this kind of middleman between Europe and China or the Spice Islands, that being the Dutch East Indies, where the Dutch East Indies would be, or India, right? They didn't want this kind of Muslim middleman. They wanted to get there themselves. So they thought of, why not sail west? They didn't know America was there. And so they'll do that, and that's why Columbus eventually discovers America, right? He didn't think there would be a new continent. In fact, he calls the people living there Indians because he thought they were Indians from India. That's where that comes from. Last thing is competition, and I like to call it glory. Europeans are greedy. Kind of mincing words. Basically, European states want the entire pie. They don't want a slice of pie. They want the entire thing. And so the first two European nations that start to kick off this competition are the Spanish and the Portuguese. And obviously Columbus was associated with the Spanish. But what did Portugal do? Well, they had a prince. And what was his name? Henry. Prince Henry the Navigator. And he was basically a political ruler who sponsored a lot of expeditions. And what the Portuguese would do is they would first figure out that they could just sail around the Horn of Africa. It was not an immediate discovery, but that's something that Prince Henry's expeditions lead to. Another thing is that after Columbus finds America, comes back to Spain and say, hey, we should capitalize on this stuff. Portugal will say, hey, Spain is going in on this. Maybe we should kind of make sure they get less of the pie. Eventually, this kind of conflict, indirect conflict between Portugal and Spain, will lead to them to appeal to the Pope, and the Pope will say, I don't know, Spain's cooler, and he'll draw the Treaty of Tordesillas, basically giving most of the Americas to the Spanish, even though everyone will ignore that Treaty of Tordesillas. And the reason why the Pope does this is because he was Spanish, by the way. Okay, cool. So in summary, God, gold, and glory are the ultimate motivations for European exploration. That's interesting to know. But what about... Sorry, I'm looking at chat and I'm seeing some questions. Are there any questions about this, by the way? Because I was about to move on to 1.3, and I have a question. I'm supposing that some people have questions on this. Which units are most heavily weighted in 8-push? Units 3 through 8. Are there any questions, by the way, on this topic? Because in summary, you all really need to know is religion, money, and being cool. Feudalism is a social system. It's a kind of exchange between a king, his lords, and the people who work for the lords. Basically, this is a mutually beneficial system where serfs would harvest, do menial labor for lords, and lords will give them their protection. Lords will give a part of their pie to the king, and the king would just be a figurehead, or have his own kind of bigger military to protect the rest of the lords. How does feudalism contribute to European exploration in America? That's a good question. It doesn't. The reason why I talked about feudalism is that the Crusades, it's the more important part. The Crusades are going to be the thing that pulls, and the Black Death, that's also linked to the Crusades, are going to kind of start pulling the Europeans out of feudalism and start looking into, money is cool, and trying to get goods and all that. Why was the Mid-Atlantic area so heavily desired? We will get into that in Unit 2. Wait, what happened with Spain and Portugal again? They were the countries that kind of had... Okay, side tangent. Spain and Portugal are in what we call Iberia. At the time, Iberia was controlled by Muslims, and Muslims knew how to sail. They were good sailors. They knew how to work with compasses, astrolabes, and all that. So what happens after the Reconquista is that the Spanish and the Portuguese are going to have this kind of maritime technology. That's why they're kind of the first people to start the rush. Yes, they wanted a trade route with India without the Muslim middlemen. Okay, it's best we move on quick to an MCQ as a break. So please look at the following MCQ. Right, which of the following best describes the role of religion in colonization in the period 1491 and 1750? I should have put in exploration, but the intentions kind of remains the same. So I'll give you guys 2 minutes to read through these options, and I want you guys to post your answer B. You guys are quick. Yeah, it is B. You should have used spoilers. I was going to say, use spoilers, please. Anyone would care to explain why B? Process of elimination. That's valid. How is it not A? The Crusades and other holy wars were commonplace, motivating Europeans to invade the Americas because Europeans didn't know that the Americas existed. A holy war is a war that's declared on the basis of religion. So, for example, the Crusades are a holy war. The Reconquista can be considered a holy war. Did feudalism enable religious intolerance? Not necessarily. No. The religious intolerance is a side effect of the fact that Europeans kind of believed in the Catholic Church as a divine entity, that Christianity was the one true religion. There's this whole idea that I am your only God. Yeah, God, gold, glory. That's the idea behind religious intolerance for the most part. And religious intolerance in Europe does lead to that. You are spoiling Unit 2, though. Okay, we're going to move on from this MCQ to the Columbian Exchange. What is that? It's not a literal exchange, right? It's a phenomenon that describes kind of movement of quote-unquote native goods or resources, etc., from the old world to the new world and the new world back to the old world. So, first bullet point, or big point, demographic change. The Columbian Exchange caused demographic change, but how particularly? Well, what Europeans did when they returned to Europe is that they brought a few certain crops. Obviously, the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, but, funnily enough, potatoes were quite important. Why? Potatoes, all the rest of the crops are all equally important. What happened with these crops is that they diversified European diet. And when you've got a more diversified diet with better nutrients, European populations are more likely to increase. And also, you have food surplus, so to speak. In addition, aside from that demographic change in Europe, Europeans are going to bring back silver and gold. And what Europeans are going to look at with these silver and gold stuff, they're going to look at it and say, wow, this is cool. I think I should sell this for money. And so kind of the commodification of goods such as silver, gold, tobacco, other kinds of crops kind of leads to the roadmap to colonial mercantilism, right? And that brings us back to the wealth part. Europeans think, oh, if these come from the Americas, why don't we just go there and get it ourselves? And so let me explain mercantilism for a second here. Mercantilism is a series of interventionist policies by the state where that they want to get as many raw resources in their colonies as much as possible to bring back, process, and to sell back in the colonies. And the colonies are going to do this for cheap labor. So all this mercantilism is going to be aimed at capitalizing or maximizing profit. And this does lead to a roadmap. This does lead to capitalism, right? Capitalism kind of becomes big in the 18th century when it's kind of codified in Adam Smith's writing, right? Now, finally, we need to talk about maritime technologies because once Europeans kind of get this taste of commodification of this mercantilism, we need to talk about what they do after that, and that's establish international trade networks, right, between the Americas and, Europe or Africa, and these are all going to be facilitated by what we will call joint stock companies, kind of the modern day international corporations, so to speak. But how did Europeans kind of facilitate this trade in a feasible way? Well, maritime technologies. That's why we're talking about it. It made long distance travel very viable. And what kind of technologies am I actually referring to? The Portuguese caravel, not particularly Portuguese, and the compass are two major technologies that you should definitely know off the top of your head if you were tested on this specifically. You don't really need to know it on the actual exam because this is Unit 1. But you should know that the caravel and compass are pretty important in making long distance travel more efficient. Why? Well, the caravel uses lateen sails, which will pick up winds and make it easier to travel faster and longer. And the compass, well, the compass is generally useful when you are traveling and you don't know where you are, right? That's an oversimplified version, but there's also the astrolabe as an instrument that I mentioned back in 1.3. Cool. One of these joint stock companies, by the way, is the VOC, which is the Dutch East India Company, and I included a plaque of that, but we will talk about that much later. Finally, the last thing that the Columbian Exchange will involve is disease. We will talk about the animals later, by the way. Diseases such as smallpox, plague, crowd diseases. And this will actually lead to another kind of demographic change, a large, sharp decline in Native American population. Why? They don't have the resistance of the immunity to these diseases like the Europeans had. The reason why I brought up the Black Death is that happened a long time ago. Europeans eventually built up some kind of immunity to the plague. They built up some immunity to smallpox, malaria, yellow fever. And what happens is that they're going to bring those diseases with them. They're not aware that they have those diseases. And what happens is that those diseases are going to jump to Native Americans. As you imagine, this will benefit Europeans who seek to conquer the Americas and establish their own private colonies or their own colonies in their own right to take land from Native Americans who would resist that. And of course, the reason I should mention this, Native Americans didn't really have this kind of America pox thing. A lot of people tend to ask this question. The reason why Europeans tended to have a lot of diseases is that the majority of the old world had very huge urban centers. They were really astronomically huge compared to the urban centers we would see in the Americas. And when you have huge people living in huge urban centers next to animals, next to other people, next to rats and all that, diseases and epidemics will naturally happen in Europe. And once they build the immunity, that doesn't go away. The microbes don't just disappear. Europeans don't know that, but the microbes still remain with them. That's why. Any questions about the Columbian Exchange? Because this is a pretty important part. Mercantilism is the practice of states, governments that want to protect their own trade, but they also want to maximize profit. Exports above imports. So what colonies would do is that they only got raw materials, sent it back to their motherland or whatever, to the original state, right, to their owner, and in that country they would process the raw resources, send it back to the colonies. And the way they would do this is to use cheap labor, triangular trade. Some people can conflate the triangular trade with the Columbian exchange. What the triangular trade, what distinguishes the Columbian exchange from the triangular trade is that the Columbian exchange is kind of something that happens in the first few decades of exploration. The triangular trade is something that would regularly happen. So for the triangular trade, we will discuss that in Unit 2, will include the slave trade, will include, the fact that colonies will send their resources back to Europe, and Europe will process those goods back down to Africa, America, and all that. Does that briefly answer your question? I don't want to get too much into the triangular trade exactly. They're not exactly the same. They do seem similar, though, because it does involve a bit of a triangular shape. Okay. Again, we're going to move on quickly. We'll leave questions once I finish 1.5 and 1.6. So 1.5 is about specifically how Spain approached colonization. Establishing the Spanish Empire. How did the Spanish establish New Spain? Right, and New Spain would be the colonies in the Americas owned by Spain. Conquistadors. Conquistadors were kind of explorers who brought weapons. So they were not there for peace per se. They were there for business, I guess. They were there with one goal: money and glory, right? And part of that does involve conflict, right? Probably the most infamous, I should say, conquistador that you guys will probably know is Hernan Cortez. Kind of one of the leaders who would contribute to the downfall of the Aztec Empire. Part of the other contribution is disease, by the way. So you should know that. Disease also contributed to the fact that Native Americans didn't really have the strongest deck against the Europeans. Not to say that they didn't see some success, but it is a strong disease, and the fact that Europeans had gunpowder as well would contribute to the eventual downfall of certain major Native American societies, such as the Aztecs and the Incas, as well. Another group of people that would come with the conquistadors were the missionaries. Those are the people that complete the religion part, the God part. And their objective is spread Christianity. So that's kind of the Spanish Empire dynamic. Spanish, or just Europeans in general, coming over to the Americas to get raw resources, to become famous for expanding those colonies, by the way. Conquistadors were not done when Hernan Cortez just went in, right? We had Coronado, De Soto, I'm blanking on some other conquistadors. But what they did is they spread out north into kind of California, right? And down south into South America, right? This was a constant development. Okay. So they have this empire. How did they treat it? Well, initially, they wanted to have cheap labor, and their first thing was the encomienda system. An encomienda will be related to the word encomendar, which means to trust in Spanish. To trust, what does that exactly mean? Well, the big boys, that is Spain, the state itself, is going to trust Spanish encomenderos to convert natives as well as use them for labor. So, yes, it's a form of slavery. And what these encomenderos would do with the natives is they would again do forced conversion, as well as kind of subject them to brutal conditions, simply to either get raw resources in the form of, I should say, either sugarcane or mining. Sugarcane, as you might imagine, occurred most in Hispaniola, in the West Indies, and the mining part mainly happened in America, mainly North America and South America combined, like Mexico, Bolivia, and then some examples of this. Of these kinds of mines would be like Zacatecas and Potosi. Potosi is particularly infamous because in these mines, there would be toxic conditions that would eventually kill off natives. So now natives are being subjected to brutal conditions. They're dying off of these kinds of, non-natural conditions, like breathing in toxins, but they're also dying from diseases, and sometimes they would just be brutalized by missionaries. So yeah. So eventually, native labor doesn't become viable. The native population starts to become not a viable resource of labor for the Spanish. So the next thing they'll turn to is the slave trade. Specifically, they're going to work with West African societies. And one thing you should know about the West African societies, I'm not going to go through full African American studies, but the big bullet point is that West African societies practiced a form of chattel slavery. Usually, West African slaves in West Africa would be prisoners of war, for the most part. The first European country or state to start perpetuating this kind of slave trade are the Portuguese. The Portuguese are pretty much the first Europeans to actually start messing around in Africa, because they did find it first. And they are going to start establishing outposts throughout the West African coast. And two of these outposts, two examples of these outposts are going to be Elmina Castle in modern-day Ghana, and it is going to be the Luanda settlement in Angola, modern-day Angola. And Luanda would be part of an outpost where they would engage in slave trade with the Congo Kingdom. As for Elmina Castle, in that case, they actually just straight up captured slaves themselves. So the ways the Portuguese or Europeans in general would obtain slaves from Africa were to either trade with the African societies, or to just straight up go in, encroach on their territory, and just capture slaves themselves. And of course, that last part wouldn't sit right with African society. So, but we don't really need to talk about that too much. Okay, that covers labor, but once, the Spanish arrive in the Americas, we get to see intermarrying. So we will see a very diverse population in the colonies. Maybe we'll see just Europeans. Maybe we'll see European indigenous people. Maybe European African people. Maybe we'll see indigenous and African slaves have their own children, and this is a whole diverse system, right? So what Europeans, or specifically the Spanish, will do is establish the casta system. Basically, this established a very strict social hierarchy on the basis of race. And the key point with the casta system was to establish the fact that the Spanish were on top, to establish that the Spanish were dominant, and also to kind of justify exploitation of Native Americans and Africans. You should know that social mobility in this social hierarchy was very, very, very rare. The only way you could kind of move between tiers was through marriage, and that's about it, because marriage comes with wealth for the most part. And if you guys are curious about the racial classifications, peninsulares are Spanish people from the actual peninsula. Criollos are going to be Spanish people born in the Americas. Mestizos are going to be Spanish indigenous peoples. And mulattoes are going to be Spanish African peoples. Now, in this chart I gave you, there are 16 classifications. Basically, as intermarrying occurs, they had to make it more complex. And finally, I do want to finish off. I want to mention one document that College Board does recommend. I think it's worthy of looking into, and it's called requerimiento. So requerimiento, I believe, means request in Spanish. I think it also means the same thing in Portuguese. Basically, the principal idea behind this document is, okay, we're the Spanish, we're cooler than you. You guys should accept our rule and convert to our religion, or we will subject you to eternal torture. And they will fulfill that promise. So, two things, if you're a Native American to hear this, you would either have two options. You would be converting and be subjugated, or you'd be killed. So that is to say, sorry, excuse me, my throat is getting dry. That is to say, the Spanish colonial system was on the basis of race, and it was also very Spanish-centric, I guess, like dominance-based. And it was brutal as well. Any questions about the Spanish? The Dutch and English tended to avoid intermarriage. That is correct. Any questions about 1.5? If I did not see your question, you can choose to repost it here. Did the Spanish and French both intermarry with the natives? Some Spanish did. As for the French, not so much. There are some examples or exceptions to that. I don't know any off to the top of my head because there's not many French indigenous people in that from that era. What happened with establishing the Spanish Empire? Basically, the context is that the way the Spanish kind of established their colonies was a brutal method. It was with force. Conquistadors and missionaries came there for the intention of God, gold, and glory. That's the key point with that bullet. Why were the Spanish removed from the Americas again? So that point is either in Unit 2 or Unit 3. Yeah, the Pueblo Revolt, which we will touch on in 1.6, and a little bit in Unit 2. Yes, the Spanish will kind of take an L for a moment from the Pueblo, but they will eventually oppress that revolt. The decline of Spanish colonies, that's going to be mentioned in Unit 2 and Unit 3, if you don't mind me holding that question for that lecture. Didn't the French marry with natives because of the fur trade and they wanted to establish relations? Some of them did. Not all of them. The big point with the Spanish colonies is that there was enough diversification of the colonial population to the point that they needed to kind of establish this casta system. Whereas with the French, that was not really something necessary. In fact, the French did not bring a whole lot of African slaves to their North American holdings. Now, they did bring slaves to their holdings in West Indies, like in modern-day Haiti, right? But they didn't really feel the need of establishing the kind of a firm set casta system, so to speak. They did have a social hierarchy on the basis of race, though. Yeah, Salted Cashew is right about the encomienda system. It is a disguised thing. And we will talk about the key idea of things kind of being covered as, oh, this is benevolent work. This is going to be, we're not torturing them. We're not exploiting them. When in fact, they are doing just that. We will talk about that in the next topic. Any more questions about 1.5 before I get into 1.6? I can move on? Okay, perfect. cultural interactions between Europeans, Indians, and Native Americans, and Africans. So in this slide, we will mainly talk about Europeans and Native Americans. We will give some example of interactions between Africans and Europeans, and Native Americans. But most of the content that your College Board highlighted in respect to Africans also appears later on in APUSH, because, yeah. So, first thing, we need to talk about the worldviews, the difference in worldviews between Europeans and Native Americans specifically. So let's talk about religion first. Europeans viewed Native Americans as pagans. They wanted them to convert, right? I'm hoping that this is a natural fact for you guys. Another thing about Native Americans, if you know anything about their kind of many different religions, is that they were focused on kind of a spirituality, the sentiment that spirits inhabited in nature around them, and thus they must respect the nature. They saw no need to convert to Christianity. So there's one conflict in it of worldview, that being religion, Christianity versus a whole wide range of whatever kind of spirituality or religions Native Americans had. Another thing is the how they viewed land. So Europeans viewed land as private property. Native Americans viewed land as a shared space where they could do their religious, daily life, where they farmed together. It was more of a communal society. So again, private property versus shared space is going to conflict each other. Why? Well, Europeans are going to say, this is mine, and the Native Americans are like, oh, but this is a shared space. Can we not hunt here? And the Europeans say, you are in my land. I am going to shoot you. One example of an interaction between a European and a Native American in this time. And the last thing I want to talk about as well are gender roles. So someone mentioned in the chat that Native American societies were somewhat more matriarchal. And that is true, right? Women had political power. More political power, most notably in the Iroquois. As a general rule of thumb, they didn't really think that a patriarchy was... They didn't really think of a patriarchy in the first place. But Europeans, well, they were very patriarchal, right? So again, another conflict in beliefs. Interestingly enough, what they're going to do is actually borrow from each other's cultures, but they will also have kinds of misunderstandings. So examples of cultural borrowing, so to speak, would involve Europeans. Sorry, I am blanking on this. I should not be blanking. I literally just wrote down this. So some kinds of cultural exchanges between Europeans and Native Americans. Well, Native Americans are going to be exposed to more goods, such as guns and horses. And so, I guess you could define this as cultural. The way that Native Americans would use these guns and horses, most notably, would be in two things: hunting and war. And we will talk about this point again in Unit 2. Some things that Europeans would have an interaction with Native Americans were in concern of fur trade. That sentence does not make sense. An interaction or exchange between Europeans and Native Americans that Europeans wanted to do a lot was fur trade. There we go. And again, the trade part is actually the most important part, because how did Native Americans get those guns and horses? They would trade with fur. For the most part. Mainly guns, but horses kind of... horses is a little bit of a caveat, because they technically did trade horses, but then those horses kind of got free and started multiplying a lot in the Americas. So yeah. There it is. It was coming back to me. Survival skills. Native Americans did share survival skills, good survival skills for Europeans, and probably the most notable example of this would be Jamestown. Native Americans in the Northeast shared their knowledge of how to live in the Northeast, how to grow crops and not die of starvation. And this benefited Europeans, or the English at that time. There is one good, also cultural exchange. This is going to come from Africans. Africans actually know how to cultivate rice. And so what they're going to do is they're going to bring that kind of knowledge of, again, cultivating in general, irrigation and all that, and that's going to benefit a lot of Europeans who need a stable food source and also want plantations. But they're also going to bring their culture, mainly their traditions of dance and song. And the majority of that is actually going to be much more relevant later on in APUSH. But do know that some African traditions did have some influence on European and American, Native American culture. Okay, the third point, diplomacy and resistance. Now, for the most part, a lot of people will look at resistance, right? We all know King Philip's War, the Pueblo Uprising, someone mentioned, the Taino Rebellion. Native Americans did not appreciate the fact that Europeans were, one, enslaving them, and two, taking up their land. And so, one thing they might resort to is violence. And I've included a depiction of this violence. And another thing that Native Americans would do is try to establish treaties. One good example would be the Wampanoag. And you guys might also know the Wampanoag for one of their leaders, King Philip. King Philip's father actually negotiated a bunch of treaties, but the issue with diplomacy with the Europeans is that they don't really have a respect for diplomacy with Native Americans. And so what they're going to do is they're going to either exploit the treaties or they're just going to straight up ignore them. And then that does really eventually lead to resistance. That's why in Unit 2, Unit 3, the majority of relationship between Europeans and Americans in general, where the Native Americans were quite hostile. Another form of resistance that occurred in the Americas were slave rebellions. Most notable one being the Stono Rebellion. And such rebellions would eventually lead to slave codes. That part is not exactly something that should be new, since this point is also reiterated a lot of times in Unit 4 and Unit 5. And finally, Europeans will start to have a debate about their position, their meaning of life, or whatever. No, about the relationships between them and the Native Americans. Why are we doing this? What are we doing here? What's exactly the key point? And there's going to be two sides of the spectrum. One, guys, we probably should chill with all the murdering. And two, nah, these guys are infidels. We're gonna fucking... Sorry, pardon the language. These guys are pagans. They don't deserve respect. They should be subjugated and forcefully converted. Sorry, not conserved. And there are going to be two figures that you should know who will represent these two points. The first one I mentioned, that being, okay, guys, we should chill out, will be Bartolome de las Casas. And we will see a source from him, actually, soon. And the other side would be Sepulveda, who represents, yeah, we should probably subjugate these guys. These guys are not cool. Again, I'm using layman's terms to describe all of this. Now, Europeans will actually respond to these debates. They're not there for no reason. And why do I say they kind of matter? Well, there's a set of legislation called the New Laws of 1542. Part of it's influenced by Bartolome's work, but it's also influenced by the fact that the king, the Spanish king, didn't really want his colonial subjects to be too powerful. So what those laws did was they limited slavery, at least among Native Americans. Okay. Any questions thus far? Yes, the sessions are being recorded, and they will be kind of made public once in a few days. Any questions about 1.6 so far? You said earlier that Indians, but I just wanted to give an exception to who thought that Cortez and the Spaniards were gods. That is true. The thing is that eventually, maybe I didn't say give this point exactly. Some Native Americans were quote unquote diplomatic, right? They didn't immediately resort to, oh, these guys are new, we're gonna kill them. No, that's not what Columbus's interactions were like with the Taino people, for instance. In fact, the Taino were a bit more accommodating. But yeah, as Urban Panda said, Europeans are gonna start being dicks, and hopefully you guys understand, if someone's being a dick to you, you're gonna probably retaliate. Y'all are in high school. Come on, you guys cuss. Anyways, if people are gonna be mean to you, they're gonna be mean back. And you know, if someone's starting to kill your people, you would probably retaliate violently as well. That's the whole thing. Also, the perception that the Spanish were gods, not particularly. Oh, Rush already mentioned that point. What was the timeline? This is just 1491 to 1607, so it's not entirely incredibly important for the A-Push exam. This is just a review session for underlying developments. In the end, I will end up summarizing all the key points that you guys need to know that's outlined in the CED. How long did early colonization last? I mean, pretty much goes up until 1700, I want to say. Maybe 1650s. After the 1650s, around that ballpark, we're going to look at colonial society as a whole. And that's what Unit 2 is about. And also, history teachers have a habit of swearing, by the way. So I am justified in my... Yeah. My AP World teacher sweared a lot. Anyways, we like to swear. Anyways, we're going to move on to our next activity. And instead of doing an FRQ, I just want you guys to look at this piece of source. This is from Bartolomé de las Casas, A Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies. This is one of the sources that College Board would recommend teachers to go over. If you're in AP World, maybe you have looked at it before. But I want you guys to take a look at it and think about all the following questions about it. You guys don't have to do it, but it is good for practice just to make sure that you guys know how to work with sources, because that's a key skill in DBQs and SAQs. The first two SAQs. I'll give you guys around... What's a good ballpark for you guys? 10 minutes? 8 minutes to 10 minutes? I'll give you guys 8 to 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Okay, I'll give you guys 5 minutes. Right now it's 6:09 approximately. So we'll regroup at 6:15. You don't have to type out like the entire T format. This is not an SAQ. Just type out your general ideas. Oh, by the way, extirpation is this is not a AP style FRQ. It's just practicing analysis as a whole. Yeah. In future lectures, I will start writing SAQs a little bit, but as of now, I'm sticking to analysis because we haven't really reached the point where we can have unit lectures that are very content heavy. Anyways, I'm distracting you guys, so... Yes, put your answers in the chat. I will come back at 6:15 and ask you guys to post your answers. Don't start posting them now. Has the prompt disappeared? I'm seeing some people in the chat saying that the prompt has disappeared. You guys should be seeing a source from De Las Casas. Okay, wait, is the prompt actually not being shown right now? Okay, for some reason the internet went out. I'll give you guys extra time for that. Sorry about that. I don't know why that happened. I'll give you guys 2 more minutes because I think I was gone for 2 minutes. I think that sounds good. It happened again. God damn it. Hold on. Come on. Get to it. There we go. Thank you, reading. I'm sorry. I don't know why internet's really wild. It's 6:15. I'm giving you guys extra time for this, by the way. But if you have finished, you can start posting. Yes, that is a MacBook trackpad. It's an iconic sound. Okay, at 6:17, hopefully everyone, or the majority of people who are attempting this, will be done by then. One sentence, by the way, one-liners are okay. But if you can, be as in-depth as you can. Yes, Rush, I am from the Pacific. Okay, it's 6:17. I'm going to be checking your responses. Thank you, Trombonist, for keeping in one response because it is much easier to read. Okay. Would you mind if I actually read your response, Trombonist? Or Salted Cashew? Any one of you. Okay. So, because of the brutality seen in America being committed by Spaniards and natives alike, yes, that is a good reason for Las Casas to write this. B, brutal atrocities by the Spaniards toward the natives while trying to convert them to the Catholic religion. Yes. C, his perspective shows just how brutal the Spanish presence in America was. Yeah, you could argue that. I was more looking for a response with respect to the debates among Europeans, but his perspective about brutality and Spanish brutality makes sense. Through showing how brutal the treatment of natives was in the presence of, I think you meant Spanish, but D was asking for how might a historian use Las Casas' writing when arguing about European colonial sentiments. That phrase is not exactly the most clear, European colonial sentiments, but it seems that a majority of you guys are interpreting that. Okay. Salted Cashew, are you fine with me reading your response? Just so that everyone who isn't looking in chat will hear some good responses. Oh god, he's not responding. Yeah. Well, I'm just going to say that people who posted in the chat have given their implicit. He said yes. Cool. So A, to evoke emotions among the Europeans against the unfair treatment of Indians. Sure, yeah, that could be part of a good reason for persuading Europeans in a debate. B, Las Casas chooses to focus on the destructive, barbarous, and greedy nature of the Spaniards. Yes, that is what he does. C, Las Casas' perspective shows that even among the Spaniards themselves, there were people who believed in fair treatment of all people. D, could use this to show early social reformers. Yeah, there's actually history papers about that. Unique I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Are you fine? This is going to be the last response I'll be looking at. Okay. A, Las Casas wanted to describe the atrocities being done to the Native Americans in the Americas. I think you forgot to include that, but that's good. The Spaniards were exploiting the Native Americans. Yeah, other people specified, but since we've read through those specified responses, I'll be okay with that. Las Casas' view was contrarian. Many people viewed Native Americans as inferior. That's good enough. Las Casas argued that they were equal, specifically for Native Americans who were converted. Yep. A historian could use Las Casas' writing as evidence in an argument that while Europeans were typically okay with the exploitation of Native Americans, there were individuals who advocated against that. Okay. So the treatment of Native Americans wasn't homogenous among Europeans, so to speak. Okay. All very good responses. Good job, everyone. For the rest of you who did respond, this might be a bad question. How likely are we going to see an FRQ of some sort on this period? Period 1. Most likely, if it will be in an FRQ, out of all the FRQs you would see, it would probably be an SAQ, but it's not very likely. It'd be most likely covered in the SAQ section. Yeah, Salted Cashews say the other units are more fun, more juicy, and more important in the context of A-Push. How many MCQ questions? My biggest approximation might be 3. That's it. On this unit, he asked. 3, 4, somewhere in that ballpark. Right? This unit is not the most important. If you guys don't remember entirely everything I just yapped about, That's okay. The rest you guys will have to remember. Specifically units 3 through 8. Those are the biggest units. All right. Any questions about this part of the analysis? Any questions about the sourcing? Because it seems that all of you guys understood the questions well. To answer your question about the last unit, Unit 9, Unit 9 is 46% on College Board. It's the same. Actually, when I took the APUSH exam at the time, there were no questions on it. That's because that's an era that College Board really doesn't want to touch on because it's the most political part. Same case for AP World. They really want to stay away from entirely modern history, even though it is somewhat interesting. Rush is asking, how did the Spanish colonization of Florida affect the local trout population? Did that cause any consequences for seeding the city of Miami during the interworld war period? No, Rush. You don't get to ask these questions. Spanish colonization, I don't know any particular details or evidence about it, but I would suspect that it has led to some kind of damage to local populations. Invasive species and all that. Where's the U.S. on the map? It's there. Okay, we're moving on. Before we go to the Q&A section that I put in there, I'm going to do Omer's job for him. This is the feedback. I would really appreciate if you guys if you would guys fill this out. This is my first time lecturing a humanities course, and I want to continuously improve on that, because I'm going to be doing this for a long, long time. When I say that, I'm going to be doing the rest of APUSH. And when it does come to the more important units, like units 3 to 8, I want to be as clear as I can and be brutally honest, because I've been brutally honest to other people. So this is... yes, please do this survey. Please, I am begging you. You will make me personally happy, even if you insult me. If you could have more than a breakup and just link into more sites. That was the initial plan, yeah. But for the most part, these slides are there just to organize my train of thought. But I will take that into consideration. Thank you, reading. That is the link. If you guys don't want to scan the QR code, I don't know if the QR code works. It should, but there's the link there. Okay. Now here comes the fun part. You guys get to spam questions. I'm kidding. Don't spam questions, but give us some questions. If you guys don't have any questions, you are free to go, but maybe some people might have good questions. Who knows? Oh my god. I forgot I included what I had for lunch. What did I have for breakfast? Nothing. No, that's a lie. I consumed the tears of children. Specifically of APUSH students. I'm going to scroll through some of these questions. If I did not respond to your question, is it really important to remember the time for the units? Most of the units' time frame will be kind of expected. But you don't need to know exact cutoff dates. If you're like a decade off, you should be good. But for the most part, once they go past that reconstruction, units 4, 5, and 6, I think those are the units that have really weird timeline. Like two of them like literally intersect. But you should know kind of a vague ballpark for these years, not exactly the month and day. Rush is asking what I will eat for dinner. I don't know. Like, I'll probably just have a normal sandwich. Unit 2 is establishing colonies. Yes, it is important. How do I pronounce my name? Liuren? So unit 1 is more of a setup, but unit 2, parts of it will appear, but again, it is kind of partially a setup. Is fine. They're kind of a setup for unit 3 as well, but you should know unit 2 more so than unit 1. Unit 1 is important to know mainly because of the Spanish messing around and finding out, and attempts at colonization. English attempts at colonization is covered in Unit 2. The main focus in this unit was Native Americans and the Spanish, in summary. For summer homework to take APUSH time periods 1 through 3 as summer homework, is this normal? I mean, it's doable. You can do it. Yes, I am done. What's the point of having an APUSH class then? Lol. Is preparing for the exam harder than the actual exam? Yeah, you do need to get exam. Yes, you can get a cookie. Yes, I am. We're done with the content. Is just for questions. Could you give the essential question we should be answered to with each unit? You mean topic? The essential questions are all given explicitly in the outline, the CED. Can I lecture AP Chem? No. First of all, I haven't taken chem classes for a while, so that would be shooting all of you guys in the face and not in the foot. AP Chem's not that bad. It's just I haven't done chem for a while. But I can probably just review it up pretty quickly. I do have a chem textbook up here in my dorm. Taking U.S. history with the teacher 2.4, that is not a good rating. It's 6 ratings. It really depends. You're going to have to talk to some people. How do you grade practice FRQs? You can ask people in the APUSH channel to take a look at your work. Yeah. AP Lang, personally, I just think is easier. It's also more fruitful than AP Lit, in my opinion. You thought this was understandable. Unit 1 has a lot of AP World content in it, right? Establishing European colonization is a big part in period 2 for AP World. I know Lance doesn't have a question for me, nor does reading. Any of the rest of you guys have questions? What's my favorite animal? Gray wolf. How often will these sessions be? There is a sheet that Lance posted with a schedule. You can just go in and check it out. Yeah, it's in under announcements. Yeah, you'll see my lecture schedule. What will I eat for breakfast tomorrow? I don't know, Rush. I don't know. Yes, there's a schedule for all APUSH. I already answered that. What's my favorite unit? Class is over, Omer. You don't need to post the feedback form. Reading already did that for you. Favorite unit would probably be period 6 or 7. UCLA, because it's a public school and tuition. Pick something. What am I? Okay, you guys are taking the what I had for lunch really literally. I didn't know AP students would do that. Yeah, Omar, you're late to class. Slacking. Thoughts on ring? No, Silver. No, Silver. No. No, Silver. Don't ask me for thoughts on ring nullity theorem. Ask me for the proof. No. Proof is not hard. It isn't that hard. You're right. Why are there a lot of... That's interesting. I'm looking through. Anyone have any other questions on this? Okay, to be perfectly honest, it's the first lecture, so there are some slip-ups. There was a technological slip-up initially. I'm sorry to anyone. I also apologize to anyone watching the recording if it also transferred to the recording as well. No. Would you mind typing your question in the chat instead? I can ask any question. Yeah, okay, mods, be fair to him. Be fair to him. I did technically put that. It's fine. He's chilling. I'll answer those if I answer all the AP questions. Just like AP World FRQ, do we use vocab to answer the questions in AP Bio FRQs? There are some vocab words, but here's the thing is that... No, I'm not answering that question, Rush. Here's the thing is that if you just name drop, you're not likely to get any points. The whole thing about vocab is you need to demonstrate that you can draw evidence and use that evidence to support an argument very well. So there are some like vocab stuff that will constitute evidence, right? But just dropping them is just not enough. The difference between an LEQ and a DBQ. A DBQ is a document-based question. An LEQ is a long essay question. So a DBQ will give you a bunch of documents, just 7. And what you're going to do is you're going to use those documents to answer a prompt they give you. And that's about it. An LEQ is you cook up some evidence and you spit out an essay. So the skills between a DBQ and an LEQ are pretty transferable. No, Rush, I'm not giving you my IP address. Okay, for the rest of you who have questions, please drop them now. Silver asked a question, for real. That is not it. I memorized the IP address. I'm writing an LAQ this Wednesday on something I'm completely unfamiliar with. Any tips? It's like I'm Nixon somewhere. I would hope you would know what the topic would be in advance, or at least the period. Try to... Okay, Nixon, Carter, all. That's just pretty much period 8. So, when you're looking at an LEQ, Carter's period 8. Period 9 starts with with Ronald Reagan. So when you look at an LEQ and the worst case, I'm going to start with the worst case scenario. Hopefully that isn't what's going to happen. You need to start kind of yapping. Start getting your brain to actually work. In fact, that's kind of what happened today, to be brutally honest, is that we forget stuff, right? We blank on stuff. So what we do is, as teachers and lecturers, is that we start yapping until we actually get to what we want to say. Heimler also has done that. He was actually asked a simple question: populists versus progressives, and he blinked on that question. Basically, what he did on that live stream, I watched that, was he started yapping, and then he finally actually got to the correct answer, the difference between populists and progressives. I'm not going to answer that question now because that's Unit 6, Unit 5, somewhere in that ballpark. When College Board says that the first LEQ topic is from 1492 to 1800, 90% of the time doesn't mean that it's after 1706. It is most likely going to be after 1706. It's most likely going to be either in Unit 3 or in Unit 4. Very funny, Peikyun. Do I really want to answer this question when I'm going to answer that question in the future? Fine. So the populist party is going to start out with the idea of kind of farmers going against the rich. Why? Because farmers were kind of not getting the same treatment. They were not being treated fairly, because who gives a fuck about farmers? Corporations don't give two fucks about farmers. And so they're going to start off their populist party to say, hey, these guys, yes, railroad companies hated farmer. They're actually the biggest third party in history. And they were really close to making big gains. In fact, they did make some big gains throughout the century. Unfortunately, they kind of lost steam. Mainly because we do see the kind of the return of the Republicans, as I say, the return of the Republicans pre-switch, kind of controlling the 20s as well. And the Republicans take the mantle after the Progressives. The Progressives will adopt similar language to that of the Populists, but their main focus is essentially social reform, right? But Populists and Progressives they're mainly going to work together for the most part. Why? They kind of share common interests. So yeah. Populists, what do you mean with this question? The biggest third party actually made the two main parties include their values in their campaigns. Oh, this is going to get me into some AP Gov stuff. In some ways, yeah. It did help define... it did help force the main party system to define their campaigns in a firm position. But the subject of campaigns and like values and all that, part of that is a poli-sci question or AP Gov question as well. Part of it is at least justice for my boys William Jennings Bryan. I think that's right. Yeah, William Jennings Bryan. Thank you, Silver. Time for Unit 2 lecture. That is not today. Unit 2 is not today. That is what happens in third parties. So Democrats, for the most part, are not going to do that a whole lot. The main presidents who will do that are majority Republican, but the one Democrat that did this, that was kind of with the progressive movement, sorry, not party. Have I been saying party? I should be saying movement. Wilson. And Wilson was a Democrat, and also I hate Wilson. Not because he's a progressive, but other things. Rush knows it. But there is a general trend with third parties, that being the main parties will always adopt them. So, for example, the Green Party will promote environmentalism. Well, guess what? The Democratic Party adopts that, so they will get votes from potential voters for the Green Party. That's the general trend with third parties, and that's what happens with the progressive movement. is that they will adopt they will take in populist voters in order to win elections. And that's the whole point in the context of gov. Do you have to memorize all the presidents? No. Like, what the hell did Rutherford B. Hayes do? Not a whole lot. You do have to memorize significant presidents like Roosevelt, both Teddy and FDR. You should know Truman. You should know LBJ. As you get to the closer to the modern era, you kind of do need to know what each president did because they all did a lot of stuff after FDR. That's a matter of AP Gov. And I might touch on it when I lecture on FDR's New Deal programs. Your teacher's favorite president? That's an interesting choice. That's an interesting choice. But yeah. Is that all the questions regarding APUSH dealt with? Let me check. If I haven't answered your question, please repost it. You can bump it up. Wasn't Hayes the one who ended Reconstruction? He didn't formally end it. It's the compromise that ended it. So it's a compromise kind of negotiation between political parties so that he would get into office in the first place. He didn't really make that choice. It's just that his party wanted him in. That's it. Which is dumb, right? But yeah. Any more questions about APUSH content? And if you have any questions about Unit 1 as well, any clarifications regarding the lecture, please ask. I am going until 7, unless nobody has questions. Any TLDRs on the causes and effects of the major wars? When you say major wars that the U.S. participated in? Oh boy, that is gonna take a while. Because sometimes I might blink on important wars. Okay. I got 15 minutes. I don't hate you guys. It causes imperialism. I am on the clock. Okay, let's start with Spanish-American War. Cause imperialism. That's pretty much it. The Americans don't like Spanish. The fact that the Spanish have Cuba and all that. And so they're going to use yellow paper journalism to persuade the public to support a war with the Spanish so that they have that they can have the more holdings in the Americas, even though they also gained the Philippines from that. Could the Americans have won the War of 1812? Not really. The American Revolution, hopefully you know what the causes are already. I don't think you need a TLDR because that's like really quintessential. But do tell me if you need to do. Effects. American Revolution. America exists. Established their own constitution, their own kind of government. Yeah. I guess War of 1812, we can also include that. Causes. Warhawks. People kind of got excited about declaring war on Britain for whatever reason. It does have to do with kind of the increasing tensions with the British and the French. The fact that they were impressing our sailors. And they were not impressing them with amazing galleons or whatever, or something like that, right? Effect, the War of 1812, it was kind of a useless war. There was not a real objective, but the effect, you could argue, is that, hey, we're high on American spirit. Yes, American identity does become stronger after the War of 1812. So yeah. Never say that again, please. Rush, you're the one. Okay. What have I not mentioned? War of 1812. Civil War. I hope you guys know the cause of. Yes, Jackson was a war hawk. Civil War, slavery. That's pretty much it. A lot of people say states' rights. Well, states' rights to do what? To keep slavery around. The effects. A lot of dead Americans. The Reconstruction Amendments. And not a good look for America. Why? Well, you got freedmen. A lot of African Americans who are in this very, what do we call it? Like a Balkan powder keg. So yeah. Yeah, both sides were Americans, duh. That means a lot of dead Americans. True that. Mexican-American War, Manifest Destiny is the main cause. The effects, we got more land. What else? And any other significant wars. I don't think I should need to mention World War I or World War II. I think World War II at least has been in the... You guys want to mention Korean? Well, I can mention any kind of proxy war in the Cold War. Basically, Americans don't like communism, so they're going to try to contain. So they're going to wage these proxy wars in order to get the side they like best to win. Yeah, containment. And also the domino effect. They believe that if a country turned communist, the rest would turn communist. George Kennan, yes, sends that long telegram. Is there any other major war that I've missed? I might have missed one or two. Somebody remind me. Prompt my brain, stimulate it. George Kennan, his long telegram, which is actually long, basically expressed concern about growing Soviet influence. As for his position in terms of foreign policy and direct military involvement, I have not seen a lot of evidence from him, mainly because I'm not interested in the guy. He's just some American diplomat. I'm sure he would have been a bit against, a little bit concerned about the way we worked with the Korean War, getting the entirety of UN to intervene, but... Yeah. Okay, was it Nomi who asked the original question of the TLDRs of causes and effect? Yeah. Did that cover everything you wanted, or do you also want me to talk about the war on terrorism? Because that's a Unit 9 thing. Sure, why not? Okay, war on terrorism. 9/11. Pretty much the cause, principal cause, right? And what we wanted to do at the time was to make sure that we didn't want to deal with another major attack. So kind of a preemptive strike, so to speak. So that's how the war on terror kicks off. As for the effects of it, well, part of it is kind of... Historians will debate me on this. Part of it is still going on. As for the war countries that we have gone into, a lot of devastation and a lot of anti-American sentiment among Middle Eastern communities in the Middle East. I want to be clear about that. So yeah, I don't think you really need to know a whole lot about the war on terrorism, but if you're... I will poll whether or not you guys actually want Unit 9. How important is memorizing LBJ's domestic Oh yeah, College Board will definitely want you guys to know about Great Society programs. Do you need to know the exact things he did? Not so much, but I do know that there are some MCQs on AP Classroom like, oh, you have to know what those programs are. Not exactly. You can get by just fine. Oh, hey, Cameron. Yep, you need to know Great Society. Hello. Fortunately, you joined in during the sections question, so it's just a bunch of silly things. I don't hate Rush. I'm just answering questions that pertain to A push first, because that's my biggest concern. Sure. I am. Nomiya asked me a good question, and I wanted to answer all the parts to it. I did just say that, no, I don't think I want to make Rush a guest speaker yet. Yet. Maybe at some point. Bye, Cameron. I don't know. Test. Yes, the test. Reminder for people who are taking A push is going to be May 9th. Mark that on your calendar so that you get good sleep on May 8th. That's one thing I will repeat over and over on the day before the exam, but that's besides the point. Yes, please get good rest on May 8th so you perform very well on May 9th. AP exam is around the corner. How many more of these lectures are there? So I'm going to do one lecture for Unit 2. I am going to do I'm going to split 3 through 8 into 2 lectures, and hopefully I don't go over time. But I can't make any promises because there's a lot of content in the CED. So yeah, I will do one. Okay. You might not complain, but I'm not. I might go over. The thing is, I don't want to go over because I don't want to bore people, right? It's a long time. So yeah, and it's really hard to sit through 2-hour lectures. I know. I sit through 4 2-hour lectures a day. 6 technically. It's not fun to sit through. So I get what you guys are doing, going through. Kill me, please. Anyways, what I was going to say, I'm going to do one lecture on Unit 9 if people want it, and I'm going to do a lecture on exam tips, quote unquote, if people also want it. So I am going to release a poll for Unit 9 and Unit Omega, as I would call it, the exam tips. So yeah. Thank you, Nicholas. Yes, it's very hard to prepare for these lectures and actually talk. I had to drink a lot of water throughout the lecture. Okay, any more questions about A-Push and review sessions in general? Speak or forever hold your peace, because I will... No. I use the Cyrillic, Rush. Come on. No questions? You will provide valuable info. I don't know about that. Lance is in here. Lance might shoot me if I... Lance might shoot me if I mess around. Gotta be... You are practicing your First Amendment in the chat. Let him speak. Oh! Alright, Lance. If you... Oh. Oh. You know what? Lance, do you want to... Not Lance. Rush, do you want to speak now? This is technically being recorded still. Okay. Before I make Rush have fun, I'm going to say thank you everyone for coming. This concludes the lecture and all the questions. And so I'm going to end the recording off here. When will we gain access to the recording? It'll be posted on the calendar schedule. Good thing I got that information. Okay, thank you so much. Okay.